Right, okay, we'll make a start. So welcome everybody to our very first OMRACT Foot and Ankle SIG. I'm going to start by hopefully moving the slide on. Or not. Let's Okay, so first of all, just to introduce you to, this is our steering group. So I'm the co-chair for Europe with Professor Philip Helliwell, who's just been talking, Professor Hilton Menz, who's on the screen, and Professor Marion Hannon, who unfortunately can't join us. You can see Lara on the left-hand side here, who is our fellow, and who will be speaking in a moment. And then other members of both OMRACT and the foot and ankle community that make up our steering group. And then we have a large group of working group members as well. So here you can see our progress so far. Our aim is obviously to develop a core outcome set for foot and ankle disorders in rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases. Lara has undertaken a scoping review of domains and also qualitative literature review. Both have been accepted for publication, and the scoping review was published this morning, which is very exciting. So Lara has attained ethical approval for the interviews, and these are interviews that are taking place in the UK. She's actually interviewed her first patient, and we're focusing on the people that are essentially missing from our qualitative review. So she'll give you some more details about that shortly. We're also in the process of going through ethics approval for focus groups, and we're going to be undertaking those in Australia, America, India, Egypt, and we are looking for a site in kind of Eastern Europe if possible. So if you can put us in touch with anyone, that would be great. So the scope of our core outcome set was discussed at our virtual SIG last year, so we're not going to go into any further detail with that today or discuss it any further, just as time doesn't allow. And we've also confirmed that it'll be with adults with rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases and foot and or ankle disorders. You can see the group of diseases that we'll be focusing on here, and we'll be excluding people with acute trauma or injury and comorbidities such as diabetes, peripheral arterial disease, and neurological disorders that manifest in the feet. So our interventions are pharmacological, conservative, or surgical, and these are the types of studies that we will have included in our reviews so far. So today we're going to hear, first of all, from Kathy and Pam, who are our patient research partners for the foot and ankle group, as to why the feet and ankles are really important. Lara's going to take us through what we know so far, a summary of the the scoping review and the qualitative review. And then we're going to split into, well, we may actually stay as one group, given the numbers that we've got, it might be more useful. Maybe the guys online might have the opportunity to discuss between themselves as well. The proposed domain definitions that we have a whole load of sheets of paper with all of our domains that we've identified so far and the definitions that we've started to think about. Obviously, we're likely to pick up more domains as we go through the interviews and focus groups, but just as a starting point. And to discuss particularly any new domains that were identified following the qualitative review, a couple of really interesting ones. And then to start to think about where does a core domain set for foot and ankle overlap with existing core sets, whether that's disease specific, and are there any domains that we think might be completely unique to foot and ankle, and how do we start to unpack those? And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time just to feedback, although because we're all in one group, everybody will be part of the conversation. And maybe we might use those extra 10 minutes to prepare our 2 slides for feeding back at 10 o'clock. Sorry, I've just noticed that the times on these are all an hour ahead. Not quite sure. Obviously, Lara and I are not quite sure what time zone we're in. Right, so I'm going to hand over to Kathy and Pam now. I've got 2 microphones here, so I don't know whether you...
Oh, it is working. Hi, I'm Pam. I'm Pam Richards from Bristol in the UK, and I have rheumatoid arthritis. Can you hear me online? Just nod. Yay. So I'm Pam. Nice to see you all in the room. Yeah, so and then Kathy.
Yeah, I'm Kathy Hofstetter.
So we're going to do a bit of sharing back and forth. When I first started with rheumatoid arthritis, for those of you who know about rheumatoid arthritis, I'm sorry, but you know it affects the small joints first. So it affected my hands and my feet. The trouble was everybody saw my hands, so they assumed that was all the problem was. It was just my hands, and I got all the attention on my hands, but they didn't realize that my feet are killing me, almost quite literally. I had just moved to Bristol. I was a walker, I was a cyclist. I wasn't a driver, so I never drove anywhere. I walked or cycled. I've just doubled my mortgage to buy a flat because I could walk to work. And within a week of buying my flat, moving in, my RA flared. I didn't know it was RA. And suddenly my expenses shot up because I had to have either taxis to get 1.5 miles down the road because I couldn't stand waiting for the bus. So my expenses went up. Working was difficult, primarily because my occupation was you had to wear court shoes. Those days you couldn't wear trainers. And I would walk to work with my feet covered in plasters because they were just in a bad breakout state. Walking was like dreadful. Every part of my toes, the metatarsal heads had obviously dropped, although I didn't know that what it was. So it was like walking on glass every single step, and it was sheer agony. But when I'd go for an appointment, again, all the focus was on hands. Nobody ever asked to look at my feet. And every day, even up to now, I'm aware that I have feet and I have ankles and I have toes and I have individual toes because every toe is a problem. And even sitting here now, my toes are telling me, you've got toes because they're shouting at me. So I'll leave it there for now and let Kathy have a chat.
Yeah, I think when I was diagnosed, I totally agree with Pam that the focus is on hands and not feet. And for, I would say, most of my appointments that I went to my rheumatologist, my socks and shoes stayed on, and all she would do is that dreadful screening squeeze where they squeeze your metatarsals, which is, I think that should be illegal. It's the most painful thing on the planet to have somebody squeeze that. And anyway, so there was very little attention paid to my feet. And I know my biggest problem was not so much my toes, it was my ankles. I had chronic swelling for so long that all of the tendons and the ligaments became very lax. And so I started wearing high top running shoes so that I had good, strong support around my ankles because I was going over on my ankles all the time. So not only were they swollen from disease, but they were swollen because I was going over on my ankles all the time. And when I told this story, when we had the online discussion, I was living in a flat in Toronto on the 2nd floor, and I had to go to a laundromat to do my laundry. And I came down the stairs and came out of the house, and there was about 5 stairs down to the walkway. And I hit the top stair and I went over on my ankles and fell down the stairs. And all of my smalls were spread all over the front lawn of the house. So I had to quickly recover myself and gather it all up again to put it back in the basket to go and do my laundry. So just horrible things like that. And I think what it does is it erodes your self-esteem. And so eventually, because you can't wear what you consider to be proper shoes, I worked in construction all my life, so I wore running shoes to work, or I had work boots that I had to wear, but I couldn't get my feet into them because they're inflexible and with the steel bits in them, and so I couldn't get my feet into those, but I wore running shoes. And my running shoes, the laces were stretched right to the max. Like I never did shoes up. And everybody got used to me wearing running shoes wherever I went. And it took me, I don't know how many years before I actually, that actually got better, but it became better because I went to, I took a class at a place called LifeMark Health, and it was, you went into a warm pool and we just walked laps in the warm pool, and just walking in the pool, just made my ankles so much stronger. So that was helpful, but that wasn't something that anybody suggested to me. It was quite by accident that I had that good outcome from doing that. But, as Pam said, you try to stay healthy. And one of the first things they say is, walk more, take the stairs, do this, do that, try and walk as much as you can. But when your feet hurt, it's just awful. I've had one surgery. I was getting chronic infections in my left foot because the shape of my feet and my toes and everything, and I had a huge bunion on my left foot. And so I kept getting these chronic infections. So finally I had surgery to correct that. They excised the bunion and put 2 screws in to straighten my toe out, but he didn't put a pin in my toe. So the IP joint in my toe, my big toe, a huge osteophyte grew on it. So now the top of my toe is crooked. So at first it was the whole toe, and now it's just the top of my toe. And that's even worse, because when you start walking on the side of your toe, then that misshapes the nail. And then that causes another problem. It's just one thing after another, but nobody pays attention to your feet at all. They don't look at them. It's like, if you can't see it, we don't talk about it. We don't think about it. And your feet are under the table most of the time, so nobody sees them. I think the worst thing is that, in the summertime, people are wearing strappy little sandals, and you can't do that. And I think it just eats away at your self-esteem, and the fact that your feet hurt all the time. And probably everybody here right now, their feet and their ankles are bothering them because of being on, in a hotel and being at the altitude that we're at and everything. I'm sure everybody's has some swelling in their feet and their ankles, but I think for me, the worst thing is you can deal with the pain, but it's that erosion of self-esteem. And Pam has a really good story about something that she had to go without because of it. More important, they hear me. Can you hear me speaking? Oh, there you go. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just, I'll give it, I think some of you have heard my story of having to turn down a wonderful wedding in a Tuscan castle. And I've still never made it to Tuscany, because when I received the invitation, the first thing I thought of was, what shoes can I wear? So I declined the invitation simply because I didn't know what shoes I could wear. So that was very sad. But talking about surgery is a hugely important aspect of RA feet, and it often goes wrong. And there's no way of measuring the long-term effect of surgery. So I've had surgery. It was a great professor who did it, but he let one of his students do some of the surgery. It wasn't so good, and he never realized that it wasn't so good. So that student didn't actually learn from the mistakes he made to my feet. The mistakes I live with today, I still have to have podiatry every 3 weeks because of a mistake that was made in that surgery, and that was 25 years ago. So,
yeah, they were both really insightful stories there, and unfortunately ones that we hear too often. And I know that Lara and I have both been promoting Foot and Ankle. We invaded the scleroderma session the other day because they were talking about Raynaud's and digital ulcers, but there hadn't been much consideration of sort of feet or promotion. So we have agreed to sort of work with them, which is great. So I'm going to hand over to Lara now, who will share what we've found so far.
Thank you. So I'm just going to give a quick update on all of the progress we've made so far. So we actually started all of this work in 2019, but I only started my PhD last year, so I was able to make significant progress because I basically dedicate all of my time to it. So I'll start with our scoping review. So we set out to identify what outcome domains have been measured in previous existing trials and observational studies. Our inclusion criteria is much the same as our scope. So adult patients with foot and ankle problems in rheumatic diseases, Heidi went through the scope before, conservative pharmacological or surgical interventions. We were only interested in comparative studies. Obviously, we had no restrictions on outcome domains because we were just interested in anything. We searched 6 databases from 1980 to 2020, and also 3 trial registries from 2015 to 2020 as well. And we included 150 studies, 83 of them were randomized trials from 26 countries. And you can see the intervention type breakdown there. And the graph on the right shows how most of the studies included patients with foot or ankle osteoarthritis, followed by foot or ankle problems in rheumatoid arthritis. And there's not much representation from the other conditions that we were interested in. And then after we had quite a lot of discussion, because basically domains are all of the domains were described in lots of different ways, but we came together as a steering committee and amalgamated quite a lot of them. We got it down to 43 broad domains, which I've just listed here in the OMRAT core areas. And I've highlighted how foot and ankle pain was the most frequently measured in red there. And sorry, you can't see it, guys, the Zoom thing's in the way. But 118 studies measured foot and ankle pain. And then the other kind of top domains are in bold there. So joint range of motion, alignment, gait. Sorry, you can't see, but in life impact, there's foot function, global function, quality of life, and then healthcare utilization is the top measured one in resource use. And then we moved on to a qualitative review. So we set out to answer the research question, what are the perceptions and experiences of people living with foot and ankle disorders in rheumatic and musculoskeletal diseases, and how do these disorders impact on their daily lives? So we were really interested in patients' symptoms and the impact of these symptoms on their lives. We were only interested in interview or focus group studies because we wanted to do a really in-depth analysis. So again, we searched 6 databases from 1980, and we found 34 qualitative studies, 30 of them were interview studies, from 7 countries. And this time, 18 of the studies, the participants had RA. There's not much representation from the other studies. Where it says mixed, it's like where they've included some patients with foot and ankle OA and some with RA. And these were our themes that came from our big thematic synthesis. So pain, change in appearance, activity limitations, social isolation, work disruption, financial burden, and emotional impact. Financial burden actually wasn't in there originally. It was when I'd gone through all of the analysis with Pam and Kathy, and they highlighted where's financial burden, and I actually went through all of the coding again and realized I'd missed that actually it's a big thing in all of those studies, or most of those studies. So we added it in. Our next step was just to map those themes onto potential
Can you hear us, Laura?
Yeah.
If is that Phil asking a question? If someone asks from the audience, can they give them the microphone, then we can hear.
Sorry, Phil, I thought you didn't want to hear me. I was making a comment that these domains that Lara's pulled out of the qualitative research was very much the feedback we'd had from the audience in an earlier session this week, where we were looking at trying to get commonality across domain definitions. an understanding. And for every domain definition, pain, interference, pain intensity, quality of life, these same domains come out all the time as important to people. So sorry.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thanks, Philip. Yeah, so then we mapped the domains in our big thematic map into kind of what would be considered more broad domains. So you can see how everything interlinks there. That's from our paper. That's very much our interpretation. And when we do our breakout group exercise, we might have some different ideas about what things are called and how they're defined. And then finally, we held a virtual SIG last October, and 52 people attended. So we asked for feedback on the scope of our core outcome set and our proposed methods. There was no objection to combining the foot and ankle in one core set, but we did an informal poll and 69% agreed that a core set for foot and ankle problems across multiple different rheumatic conditions was feasible. So the conclusion from that was that we do need more evidence for some of the conditions that haven't been represented. And that leads us to our next steps, really. So as Heidi said, we're currently doing qualitative interviews with people with some of those conditions, like particularly systemic sclerosis, where there's nothing qualitative. So we don't know what outcome domains matter to people with foot and ankle problems in that condition. And also there's very little from lupus, spondyloarthropathies and MSK disorders in the absence of systemic conditions. So that's our focus, as well as focusing on the locations that haven't been well represented either. And that's it. So we can go into our group and have a discussion around
Thanks. So when you're looking at the literature, did you include orthopedic literature?
we included, yeah, like surgical studies comparing treatments for, yeah.
The reason I ask is because many of the foot and ankle problems may not be surgical, right? So podiatry, orthopedics deal with foot and ankle diseases, which are not systemic diseases, but local or malformations. So that may give you some other avenue for looking at the domains and which literature you can look at.
Mm-hmm.
Did you hear Randall's question? Yep, great. Thanks.
Sorry to jump in, and I just wanted to comment on the patient statements earlier, and Phil may want to jump in on top of me over this, but it's really interesting the range of reasons why doctors don't care about this issue. One is the time it takes to do. Everybody knows that one. Two is they feel untrained, and Phil's been trying to train people for years how to just at least examine and try to understand foot problems. So third, I think a lot of the foot problems go to, dare I say it, surgeons who have this sort of straight line view of things. And one of the problems for surgery across multiple areas, including orthopedics, is this idea of correcting anatomy and some sort of idea of shape without any thinking about functional correction. And number four is the frustration that comes from doctors who, this is a problem. If I give a good drug for rheumatoid arthritis of the hand, there's a good chance it will have a good effect. I don't believe, and I'm looking at others here to see if there's ever been a study that did ultrasound as an outcome to look at differential response in hands and feet in an RA cohort, which would be rather interesting to look at. But my point is, feet are always much more of a mixture of inflammatory and mechanical than hands. And I'm somebody who's obsessed with muscle strength. My poor people who work with me know I send everybody to walk laps in a pool, Kathy. It's my daily routine is to do that. But I think it's this mixture of mechanical inflammatory that makes feet extra hard. and trying to sort it out. And I think even the well-meaning clinicians get frustrated and give up because they don't know what to do. So I think there's a whole range of reasons why docs don't do a good job. Just thought I'd throw.
Thank you, Karina.
And I hesitate to jump on top of you, Phil, but I agree with what you're saying. And we always used to open the foot and ankle course with the many reasons why the foot and ankle is neglected by clinicians. And of course, in the UK, one of them is they're coming in vast quantities of socks and stockings and shoes, and getting shoes on and off if you've got hand problems is a challenge. So getting out the foot in the first place is difficult. And then there's problems with foot smell that people feel very bad about, and dare I say it, appearance. So yeah, I agree that there are a lot of barriers to overcome. And to your last point, the principles of joint protection are very hard to put into practice in the foot because it's a weight-bearing joint, and you can't. The only way you'd offload is to have your foot in the air all the time, which is completely impractical. And thankfully, podiatry has ways of helping that principle of joint protection with orthotics and footwear, but it's never ideal. And I think whatever we do, there's going to be forces put through inflamed joints that we would rather they weren't doing.
Yes, I'm kind of, I'm jumping out of my seat because it's, I feel, oh, I don't know how to say, interpellé. I really feel like I have to, I don't know, jump in. So, so I wanted to just add some elements. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. Okay. So I wear many hats, unfortunately more than a few months ago. So I'm an occupational therapist by training. I'm a researcher in public health and epidemiology and in shared decision making. I've had asthma since I was a baby, so as a patient. And then since a few months ago, diagnosed with RA because of my hands, of course, because then it kind of led the big inquiry of, oh, I think I have RA now, seeing the rheumatologist, everything. But I've had foot pain for a long time because of bad sandals. And it took like a long time to get addressed. It never really was addressed. And I mentioned to you, it's only because of insoles, and they should have gone probably to custom made orthotics instead. But anyway, so all of this to say that like, it's interesting because like the rheumatologist is like, oh, you have RA of the hands. And so it takes all the consultation. RA of the hand is the whole consultation because there's medication and stuff. And then for the feet, I was like, well, my feet. And it's like very minimal exam of the feet, although it has a huge impact, right? And so the feet, they said, well, maybe you have a bit of OA. And so a bit of OA. So just to bring the idea of like you have RA, you have OA, and the difference that is put clinically, and maybe the feeling that like, if you have OA of the feet, like you feel kind of a bit more in despair even than if you have RA of the feet, I don't know. But that would be interesting to see in the course that like, do you have some domains that are maybe just more important for certain conditions? Like for example, feeling like distress because of lack of, it's not being taken care of and there's nothing to do, or that's what they say. The other element I wanted to bring was there something else? I think there was something else, but I can't remember right now.
Yeah.
I'm sweating.
Oh, that's good. You bring every perspective.
A little further to what Phil was talking about, and even Corinne, that I think women are their own worst enemies because they wear high heel shoes. And there's nothing worse you can do for your feet than stuff your feet into a pointy high heel shoes. So all of the weight is on the ball of your foot. So prior to being diagnosed with RA, I wore high heeled shoes every single day of the week. And they went on at about 6 o'clock in the morning and didn't come off till about 7 o'clock at night. And I did that for a number of years. And even prior to that, I studied ballet and danced on point. And if you want to talk about stuffing your foot into a shoe, a point shoe is 2 sizes smaller than a regular shoe. And, your feet bleed. And so the things we do to ourselves, we're not doing ourselves any favor at all. The one point I wanted to make about surgery, though, is after my surgery, my surgeon told me he was going to put a pin in my toe to keep it straight. During the surgery, he changed his mind and didn't put the pin in. And now I wished he had, because the top of my toe would be straight now if he'd put the pin in. But there's no opportunity or venue or way for me to go back to him to say, you know, this is what happened. Maybe you should be putting pins in people's toes so that the outcome is a little bit better.
Really quickly, Kathy reminded me of another comorbidity to be thinking about, hypermobility syndrome. So we talk about women's feet, but people with hypermobility, women with hypermobility get channeled into gymnastics and ballet. So they have a double whammy on deformity. And often it's just called, oh, you know, you've got stretchy joints or hypermobility, but it's a compounder. So I'm just thinking about how to capture relevant comorbids. There is only, I say everybody in clinic has at least two things. They've all got mechanical problems. Some have got inflammatory as well. And that's the best way we should be thinking about. But I'm just trying to figure out how we capture comorbid conditions anyhow. And back to Corinne's statement about, I think once they have a tool, then we'll understand which domains might be more important for some diseases than others. I think it will probably come out that way, but we don't know to start.
I think the hypermobility could come under our MSK disorders that don't have a systemic diagnosis. So at the moment, we've just got a few conditions in there, but that's something certainly we could think about moving forward. So, Karen, do you want to say? Karen was just highlighting to us there that obviously we need to identify our domains first, but acknowledge how important the outcome measures will be moving forward. So I think if we can maybe move more to around sort of one table, or certainly a bit closer together, we can start to have a look at some of these domain definitions. I think as we're such a small group, I'm just wondering if we can kind of include Philip and Phil and Hilton, who are online as well, by just using the microphones to talk within our group. Is that okay?
Yep. So yeah, people move in.
Are you guys okay with that online?
That sounds like a good plan, really, because, you know, much as I like talking to Hilton and I've not met Phil, I'm sure we'd be better talking as a group.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Anyway, Hilton's about to go to sleep, aren't you?
Yeah, it's about 20 to 1 in Australia in the evening.
We were just saying that we've finally got over the jet lag and actually slept through last night, and we're going home tomorrow. So.
It's always away.
Okay, Lara. I think Philip and Hilton, did we send you the domains?
Did you get the domain list? Yeah.
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 Phil, do you have those?
I don't, but I'm happy sort of listening in. I have to go at 4 o'clock, so don't worry about me too much. For those who don't know me, I've done some work in bits around the sort of organisation of OMERACT. So I do have a foot and ankle disorder, so I'm here very much with an interest in how OMERACT works, but also with the sort of patient perspective. And so it's really interesting.
So
Thank
Philip,
you.
You're a patient research partner for OMERACT. Is that how we would describe you in our feedback?
Me? No. I'm here because I know OMERACT, and
right.
I was keen to have an experience of the SIG, and I am a patient, but I guess you could call me a patient research partner, but I'm not formally labelled as such. I don't think, yeah, but it's good to be here with you. Thank you.
On the what, Kathy, sorry, Pam is asking if you worked on the Spirit of OMERACT, Phil.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yes. And I spoke to some of you earlier in the year when there was a survey around the future of OMERACT. So I know some of you in the room quite well, and yes, I helped to the Spirit of OMERACT.
Lovely. And
he also did that wonderful survey we all answered. So some of the presentations, Phil, that have been coming up the last and today Phil was involved. So
We will just quickly introduce ourselves, literally with a name, country, and your representation here in terms of patient research partner or clinician or industry. So we'll go around quickly. Kathy, we've already heard from you. So just in the spirit of time, we'll pass on.
Hi, everyone in the room and online. Beth Richards from Sydney, Australia. I'm a co-chair of the Emerging Leaders Program here, and I'm a clinician researcher who does a bit of ultrasound, so particularly interested, part of the FUS RA group previously where we ultrasounded feet as well.
I'm Mark Campbell from Ottawa. I'm a physical medicine rehabilitation clinician.
Bev Shea, I'm also in Ottawa. I'm a clinical epidemiologist there and also the senior methodologist at OMREC.
Peter Tugwell from Ottawa, also management group.
Philip Conahan, Leeds rheumatologist, and glad to be in a meeting where there's 3 Philips.
I'm Terry Mobo Tobo, postdoc from Toronto.
I'm Randall Stevens. I'm a clinical rheumatologist and a pharma rheumatologist.
Karine Toupé-April. So I'm a professor and researcher in public health, epidemiology, and rehabilitation. And I'm also a patient on the side. From Ottawa, sorry. But yeah.
Just quickly, Pam Richards, patient research partner, Bristol, UK.
Thank you, Pam. And obviously, you know, Lara as well, our fellow. So, Lara, do you want to introduce what we're doing?
Sorry, we've got our definitions that we came up with after our scoping review. And we'd just like some input into whether you agree with the definition and the way we've categorized the domains. And then we've also got some domains that have come out of the qualitative review that may well fit with the domains that we already have, or maybe we need them to be separate and with new definitions as well. So we'll just kind of go through and have a bit of discussion about, I guess we'll split it so that they're in signs, symptoms, biomarkers, life impact, resource use, but we'll take one from each at a time, I guess, and then look at the. So Philip and Hilton have it, if they can screen share with each. Okay. Cool. So we'll start with, we'll just pick one at random. So we're starting with disease activity as the broad domain and inflammation as the target domain. And our definition is swelling, redness, and or warmth to an area.
So we
Have we got the same paper?
Yes, no, we have. Yeah. So I think probably what we need to remember is to be thinking about the fact that we're thinking about the foot and ankle. So when we've talked about inflammation and what we've identified from the scoping review is that definition of local inflammation, which is why we've gone with swelling, redness, and or warmth to an area. We've also got global change in symptoms under disease activity as well. And so that's slightly different there. To what extent have symptoms associated with the patient's overall condition changed over different time points? So patients, when they are talking about their foot and ankle symptoms, talk about how they are generally, as well as what's going on locally. And both of those have an impact on how they're functioning, how they're walking, what they're doing.
Just for the point of inflammation, pain should be there because inflammation, we have a separate domain for pain, but pain is part of the core set of inflammation, right? The other thing which you might want to consider is the radiation of pain from the foot and ankle, because radiation of pain can be above the ankle, below the knee. And so I think it's important because part of that activity of pain that's above the ankle is often misdiagnosed, like a radiculopathy and such. And so that's one of the things that you might consider.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to add anything in terms of those two we've just started with?
More semantics, but as written, it's you need to have swelling and redness and or warmth, and you won't always have, I think, swelling and redness. So do we want to be a bit more liberal with the terminology if this is going to be like an inclusion criteria type problem?
2 out of 3, 3 out of 3.
That one over that side.
It's whether you want to include 2 out of 3, 3 out of 3, 2 out of 4, because if you are too restrictive, then you'll miss patients because patients may have swelling but no redness because they have effusions. But those effusions aren't necessarily your level of inflammation may be relatively low, but because you're having to walk on your feet and ankles, then you generate joint swelling and effusions, but not necessarily heat or redness.
Can I say something? Can you hear me? The thing about this definition is that we often see people with swollen, red, warm legs bilaterally below the knee, but it's nothing to do with joint inflammation. And I have a problem with this definition for that reason, really.
Just further on that point, do we need to specify joint swelling?
So I think an awful lot of leg swelling is peripheral edema due to people with no leg muscles. So if you've got no leg muscles and poor venous return, you get a lot of swelling, and patients often distinguish that nicely for you. They say, this problem goes down in the mornings, this one doesn't. And that's a good way to try and distinguish. But it's how we get leg strength is part of the foot. So where we're talking about muscle strength, I'd care about the whole leg, whereas a lot of the other stuff should stay foot specific.
Just to build on Philip's point, should we specify whether it's subjective or objective, say swelling, redness? Because I'll often say patients, oh, it was swollen or it feels swollen, but when I look at it, it seems normal.
That's often tenosynovitis, I find. I think patients have been telling us stuff for years, and they're sensitive to a little bit of fluid and a little bit of tenosynovitis that we can't ever grope, that I can never feel.
Would it be nice to kind of specify if we're looking at either the ankle or the foot, or say ankle and foot, rather than just saying area?
Do you think the target domain should be local inflammation?
I mean, from what Philip just said, there might be other factors secondary to inflammation that might cause swelling. So how do you create perhaps a caveat in this definition, or maybe an overarching statement that precludes those causes, if that's not your interest?
You could say local swelling, redness or warmth to an area not explained by any other cause.
Yeah, I think local inflammation. Phil, I'm hearing Alan Tennant in my head saying, don't try and give explanation in our measurement. Let's just try. So I think local inflammation is the way to go. And let's not try and think pathogenesis in a definition.
Okay. Does anybody, we've got lots of them, so, and you know, absolutely, we could spend the whole session talking about this one. So, so I had, we just on the topic of disease activity, the global change in symptoms. I mean, I think, you know, that's something much wider, and I don't know whether that's quite an extensive discussion for today, and we might be better targeting.
There's so many things here.
Yeah.
I think maybe you've got to do it one by one. This one, what do you
Okay.
think? This one, what do you think?
Yeah. Okay. So we've right. Yeah. So let's go to the global change in symptoms on continuing on the disease activity. Yeah. So I think I'd rather target the local, or the target domain, which is global change in symptoms. Sorry, yeah. So our proposed definition is: to what extent have symptoms associated with the patient's overall condition changed over different time points? Yeah. To what extent have symptoms associated with the patient's overall condition changed over different time points?
I didn't quite see why you were asking this, Heidi, as opposed to just asking the global disease activity, how active is the patient's overall condition, and comparing that with previous assessments.
Yeah, I think you've got to be specific. I think since we've said that you can have systemic and local features, I think your questions are going to have to be local. You don't want to come up with, I mean, systemic diseases are largely going to be RA, say, when you're developing this core set. I don't think you want to come up with just an RA tool. I think it's got to be about local change in local disease state.
Right. So do you think that therefore we shouldn't include a domain like that?
I think, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Can I scribble on that?
But
right.
Suck as much information.
Yeah. Sorry, Randolph, did you want, you said something about the global disease?
Yeah, so I think the global disease, the ankle will have an impact on the global patient. Let's say they have interstitial lung disease and that's gotten worse. Any worsening of their ankle and feet from mobility will probably exacerbate their ability to actually walk because of hypoxia, as an example. But I agree with Phil. We'll focus on the foot and ankle because otherwise it gets just too gnarly.
Brilliant.
Just before you turn that over though, like, is there a possibility of having like global foot and ankle? Because as we said, there could be like a little bit of swelling, a little bit of pain, and rather than talking about the whole body, just the foot and ankle as a global entity.
So this cuts to another point that Phil's probably dealt with before. I'm also obsessed with multi-site joint pain. We've talked about this, Mark. You know, our typical patients have some anterior knee pain, some troch bursitis because they've got no quads, aggravation of their mechanical lower back pain, and tendonitis because they can't get out of a chair easily and they do their shoulders. In the foot, people also have multiple, just within the foot and ankle, there's multiple things often going on.
Yeah.
So I think there is a global foot and ankle call to be made here that makes sense, that it's not just your MTP.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
There are other regional groups, aren't there? What do they do? How do they handle it? Hand, for instance, knee.
So can you repeat that? Can you repeat that, Phil?
I wondered how the other groups, regional groups, handle this question, such as the hand. I think there's a hand group and a knee group, isn't there?
So hands done base of thumb and fingers, Phil, because basically you can split it that way. And if you want to go further, it's wrist, base of thumb and fingers. But in the core set for hand OA, I think thumb is separated, but I actually can't remember. What to have a look.
Just I guess trying to contextualize how this would be used and thinking about having been in the shoulder group and just what you're saying, Phil, with the hand group, are we seeing this being used in rheumatoid, like if we're thinking rheumatoid arthritis trials, when we have a core set there because we want to put a focus on the outcome measure in feet, or is this more realistically going to be used in non-inflammatory conditions where there perhaps isn't a core set to be used? Are we seeing how, I guess in trying to help define this, how do we see this being used?
So Heidi knows I had some deep reservations when this started for that reason, because, you know, it's OA, it's gout, it's RA. But overall, given the reasons we've said for foot being so ignored and the frequency of this problem, this is not a small problem, it's a big problem. I think overall there should be a foot tool. What's interesting methodologically to me, looking at the methodologist, is this, whereas I've argued that end stage OA is a target domain, it's a subset of the OA core set. Flares in OA to me is a subset of the OA core set. This is both a core set in its own right and a core set that is a subset of, that would be useful, well, it's not quite a core set, a target domain set for RA feet. So I think there's got to be a bit of careful methodological thinking here about terminology, but I think overall we do need a core domain set for foot.
Sorry.
Oh, Pam,
Yeah, sorry, yeah. I would echo that definitely. When you, going back to when you said about there's so many parts of the foot compared to the hand, for me, there are so many little bones in the foot that I sometimes feel those little bones, but they just look like they're the top of my foot. Inside, I can feel those because those little bones are inflamed. Whereas on my hand, it's my hand, my wrist, my fingers, but it's not just the metatarsals in my foot. It's not just the toenails that I'm walking on. It's all the little ones in all the little joints, little bones in the foot. So the whole foot and ankle, I think, is the biggest cause of my disability. I can do things, I can get gadgets to correct the problems I can't do with my hands. But my disability started and continues because my feet and ankles were never cared for. I was never given joint protection, foot protection, shoe protection, information in those early years or ever. But it's the biggest cause of my disability. So.
And so I agree, we do need a foot and ankle core set, but because, well, one, there are a lot of conditions which include the ankle, but there are a lot of people who just have foot and ankle problems alone. And one of the things, just from an RA perspective, to your point, which is I don't know, because we never really looked at it, is there good concordance with improvement in the hand versus the feet? And if we actually can study that and then say, you actually have to look at the feet because they're non-concordant with treatment, then that's really an important aspect to bring forward. So that's why I say we do need one, and it will be for only foot and ankle issues that are isolated, but also we have to consider radiation of pain to the knee, well, not the causality of foot and ankle disease that causes pain to the knee, like incident bursitis, trochanteric bursitis, and back pain, right? So yeah, if you look at my trials that I've run, they always have 66 and 68.
Sorry, my comment was just about potential differential response. I think there is some old data on this, on differential response, but it'd be nice with modern therapies in RA to know if that still exists. And of course, they've all used DAS28. So we can't look at those differential responses unless we find a study somewhere that's got a 66 joint count in it still. they were all the old therapies that weren't so effective.
Well, I think
First
if you look at
instrument I learned.
if you look at the original trials for rituximab and Actemra, they'll have this 66 and 68. That's because I ran them.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had a question.
That data from Roche of rituximab
So so I have a question. So it goes back to what Beth said. So this core set would be used on top of the core set for the disease. So for example, you have a core set for RA. So you may have a global functioning or you may have quality of life, right? Which is more global. And then you would add this core set. So I guess when do we add this core set? And I guess I'm getting to the PICOS, right? In which kind of trials would we use this? Is it when foot and ankle are particularly, like you have a trial and you want to look at that specifically? And then the shoulder one would be used if, so I guess my question is, you could have, then it means you would have the RA core set. And then would you add the need, you know what I mean? Would you add all of these different other core sets? The reality is that the main big core set doesn't really address all of these specific things that are super important because you can't divide like the person's body, right? So I guess that's my question. And then you would have a lot of domains and you have to add all these domains. But maybe you have a trial where you really want to look only at foot and ankle and that is the goal, right? I guess for orthotics, I don't know if we're talking only medication trials, right? But if you do orthotics trials, then clearly you would need to add the foot, ankle, maybe the knee, right? Or I don't know, or maybe the lower, I don't know, is there a lower leg and including lower back, right? So I guess it's important to define when to use it.
And I think that comes once you've defined your domains and you have your tools and you start to have your tools, then an RA trial will primarily follow the RA core domain set and tools recommended. And we're going to have to evolve over time how we include the target domains that we've just talked about in the original core sets. And I think there's ways of doing that. Probably, I suspect, in the middle part of the onion, where we say also consider the foot core set or the shoulder core set or whatever. But in my trial, I will probably say, oh, hold on, I really care about feet as well as ACR 20s and 50s and 70s. So I will add in the following tools that measure these domains of the foot. So I think there's a way of doing it. It's just new territory for OMERACT in how to do this.
Just picking up on that directly, this fits very nicely with the Merkel circle in terms of when other organ systems are involved, then you need an additional subdomain set.
I just having heard the importance of foot and ankle and how it's often ignored, I just worry that just with the language we're using, like a plug-in or a bolt-on, and it's left to the investigator to choose, they could just choose to omit that because it's harder. So I wonder if we might change the language, like the essential foot and ankle core set or something like this to make it seem more important so that people will include it.
Yeah. So, I mean, listening to some of the comments around how some of these items may have been replicated in other core sets. And I don't know, not necessarily trying to deviate from point, but what if it would make a lot more sense in terms of organizing core sets into maybe main core sets that transcends different disease entities and specific targets specific to a particular disease entity. That way, we don't replicate definitions. We don't. We can use common sets that cut across diseases. Then we can have specific targets to a particular disease. But that's going to be a large collaboration, something for us to think about. But I think moving forward, with all of the effort I'm seeing in different groups, it might be a better way to use our time and resources.
I think it's
so. Just to say, remember, the attempt at this meeting was to start on foundation core sets. We know pain, function, quality of life cuts across just about every thing. And for years, we've thought that we should be able to develop a generic core set. But I think here, most of the generic core sets have been condition specific. And here we've identified that there are foot and ankle problems that are so common, poorly defined and cut across 6 or 7 different conditions. We've probably got to have, you know, an OA core set for the foot would not capture everything that I think you're trying to get. So I think there's got to be a foot and ankle core set, but how that's spliced and diced into other core sets is a matter for work, a matter for us to be thinking about and doing. But Mark, I don't think it means it's less essential. I think, and we've got to be careful about thinking pharma trials are the only trials, but they are important trials, and there's often money around them and a bit of money for us to do trials or do research. But they will often do, it depends on the philosophy of the company, but you know, if you're trying to get a drug registered, you do the minimum you have to do to get the drug registered. And it's up to people who work with companies to push certain angles and push certain things and make sure important measures are. And then Randall, you've been there designing these a million times.
So overall, when designing these outcome measures and core sets, et cetera, and then the instruments thereof, you want to be parsimonious with how much you ask patients or investigators to add questions and so forth, because if the number of questions are too long, then they're not as important, to be put to the very bottom of the set of CRFs that are done. If they are focused, then it's much easier to add them. And from the standpoint of standard CRFs, which are used across trials, then having one that is utilitarian across diseases is actually extremely useful, because you also have to think of whether it's an academic trial or a pharma trial, is the training you have to do both for the investigator and sometimes the patient and how to answer the question. So a focused outcome measure with focused questions and so forth, or assessments, is really key to getting it adopted, right? So if you make it too hard, you make it too long, I'm not going to use it, right? Because I have to be considering patient burden in every trial I do, because if most of my patients leave before the primary outcome measure, or I need long-term trial data and they're leaving at week 26 and I need 1 year data for the FDA and EMA, that's not going to help. So it's back to ASS.
Thank you. Okay, should we try and look at a couple of different definitions? So one of the ones that came up through our qualitative review, which we've put under the OMRAC core area of manifestations, the broad domain is change in appearance. What are your thoughts on? Yeah, change in appearance of the foot and ankle.
So within that, there was things like skin and nail changes and joint deformity, like deformity of the foot. Sorry. So within change in appearance in the qualitative review came skin and nail changes and joint, like foot and ankle deformity. And that all links to like footwear changes as well, and the body appearance of, yeah. So that's maybe something a bit different from a usual core set. I haven't seen that kind of thing in anything else. Yeah, so we don't have a definition for that. That's come from our qualitative review. And we'd like some feedback on.
Is the domain change in appearance or appearance? Because change is something you will try to measure. Okay. And generally we've been against change tools. We'd rather have a status tool that we hope is that's a whole nother debate, I think. But
so I just wonder if is it the appearance itself that is important, or is it like the distress of not having like, or like the stigma or the fact that you feel not comfortable because of the shoes, because of your feet. Like I wonder if it's just the appearance itself that we care about, or everything it means, right?
For me, it's everything it means. I don't think we can have, it would be too long a list of questions if we had self-worth, feeling of self-esteem that goes with not being able to have nice footwear or not being able to show your feet off in the summer, all of that. But appearance to me does capture all of that. Appearance, going back to what Philip said about going into the clinic and having to show your feet if you're embarrassed about your feet. It also captures footwear, the whole kabang or shebang or whatever that is.
And from a surgical point of view, it's almost top of the list that people want is to change the appearance, to improve the appearance of the foot. That and pain are the main reasons for wanting surgery.
Thanks, Philip.
So I'm just wondering if there's more than one domain there. I'm just wondering, like, is it the appearance of the foot is one thing, and then is there I don't know if appearance of the foot and appearance of the footwear, or do you feel the stigma because of how, I don't know if it would be, like, I think we have to ask the question, are these many domains or just one? And then what's the definition?
I hope I'm not necessarily pushing it too fast, but I was wondering in the wording whether we will have to still control for other causes that are unassociated with the ankle and foot, like venous stasis could cause appearances that are not totally associated with foot and ankle problems. And swelling is also going to cause an appearance issue here. And so how do we, to not make this a little redundant around multiple domains that we're looking at? Just a thought.
I think the issue is if I've got, as I have, venous problems in my leg and I've got, say, an RA ankle, one bit's going to get better with my therapy and one bit is not. So you will see differential responsiveness apart. It now comes down to the tool, probably not the domain. Can the tool be specific enough to separate? So if it's skin changes is the subdomain, then that may not change with my therapy at all. Ankle swelling goes down, but my skin changed, and that's all right. But they probably shouldn't have been put in the study for their RA skin disease. It's always hard separating domains and tools.
That's a great point. Understand, because you have patients who have congestive heart failure, who have venous insufficiency, and other conditions, psoriasis, etc. So one of the key aspects is focus on the foot and ankle from the standpoint of what you want to identify, but also take into consideration the inclusion-exclusion criteria to get the proper patient population there where you can actually see a change. So if you're looking at foot and ankle, you may want to exclude patients with diabetes because they may have diabetic neuropathy. You might want to exclude patients who have venous insufficiency, congestive heart failure, etc., where there are expected to have effects on the ankle which are not related to the damage of tendons, ligaments, and joints.
I'm just thinking in my own head here, and this probably is completely off on a tangent. How do you tease apart? I was talking about women wearing high heel shoes, and those women end up with bunions and claw toes and hammer toes because they've been wearing pointy toed shoes. And so I know my bunion was caused by my toe shoes. I know that because that's when it started, but my claw toes and hammer toes didn't come until after I had RA. So how do you tease those things apart? Because women can go and have cosmetic surgery to straighten their toes out, and then they come home and put their feet back into those shoes. So how do you tease that apart? That's something that's caused by the shoe that isn't disease related and something that is disease related?
The answer is you can't with a core outcome set, because now this is now attribution and cause, and you're correct about changes happening as a result. It's hard to me to imitate an MTP joint, but you get that clawing after you get the swelling and destruction at the joint. So yeah, you're totally logical. I often say when doing PSA talks that it's really hard to tell dactylitic toes, especially in women, because we've already made their feet so deformed with the shoes we've made them wear over a long period of time, and that's where ultrasound's used. So we can't with this core set, but what you might expect is the reversible bits might change within a study. So the bit that's the inflammation bit, hopefully one of our tools picks up, but it's not going to change that bit, not in a drug study, but a surgical trial might be able to change that bit.
Yeah, it just makes me think of like the contextual factors, right? Of like, do you also need to assess like what kind of footwear you're wearing? Are you wearing high heels? All these things as a contextual factor, right? As like other tools you'll need to have in the trial. The other thing is it raises all the issue of men versus women, or just habits of what you're wearing, right? Like what kind of shoes you're wearing, and the age of the people too, right? I mean, when you're younger, you wear a lot of really bad shoes. And as you grow older, you're more careful. Yeah, you get more sensible. So yeah, I think all these contextual factors will need to be assessed.
Just going back to when you're first diagnosed with any condition, you can't get ultrasounds, you can't get x-rays, it's all too expensive, but you can take a photograph with a phone and add that to your patient notes. So right at the beginning, if somebody like Corinne's just been diagnosed, sorry for using you as an example, take a photograph of her foot and underneath to see what it's like then, so that you can decide, 2 years later, there's big changes, or may not be big changes. You'll know if the foot 2 years later looks the same as 2 years before, because Corinne's been wearing her high shoes before she was diagnosed. Would that make any sense? It's a cheap way of giving you a baseline, possibly.
No. So the answer is from a clinical practice point of view, yes. From a trials point of view, probably not. And the reason for that is because what you have to do when you're doing clinical trials, because I've done this, you actually have to have specialized photography to manage exactly the same distance, exactly the same color corrections or lights, and exactly the same angles using all the same equipment, and then have it reviewed centrally. And so that adds not only a cost burden, but also a patient burden to sit there while they fiddle around trying to get exactly the right photograph. It's easier if you're doing a rash, because then you can make a rash decision. But otherwise, if you're looking at trying to identify issues on the joints and other aspects of the foot, which are not going to be seen realistically from a photograph unless there's substantial damage and disfigurement, then it's really hard to tell the difference. So I think in a clinical trial, it's not practical, which is what we're working on, is clinical trials as opposed to clinical practice.
Just having heard what Randall said earlier about streamlining how things are done, I just kind of feel like we're wading into a bit of a quagmire, looking into like the types of shoes people are wearing. Are they high heels? Are they sneakers? Are they men? Are they women? Do they already have orthotics? Like, I can't imagine any outcome measure that would cover all that. So it'd have to be super simple, like perceived change in appearance or something like that, as like a dichotomous or very like a Likert scale or something like that. I don't know.
Mark,
Sure. The things to consider, like I'm just reading this paragraph and just reading and what type of shoe are you wearing? What color shoe? What type of shoe do you enjoy? Are you into anyway? It's a lot of stuff.
I think probably what, I think we probably want to try and move on and discuss a different domain, but just I guess one of the things I've thought of just listening to everybody there is, will appearance change in the time of a study? Because appearance is a problem, but will it change? So if you were, I guess if you were looking at the appearance of psoriasis on the feet and you'll have an intervention with a drug, that might change. If you have a functional problem where you need an orthotic, the appearance of what you've got now and probably a year later or 6 months later probably won't change the foot. Right, okay.
What do you want to measure? Appearance coming out of really?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
We've decided we're going to move on to foot and ankle function. Target.
No. So all of these could be tangled, like it could be satisfaction with appearance, which is another type of domain, but then could be assessed differently with like a questionnaire asking, like, do you, and would that change over time?
I suspect that comes in.
Yeah. Okay, we moved on to foot and ankle function and the target domain. They need a definition. So there's nothing. And there's this other one, but we'll do that after.
So basically, when I did this scoping review, foot and ankle foot function comes up a lot, but everyone's got a different idea of what that is. So I clubbed everything as foot function, but it kind of overlaps with foot and ankle disability, foot and ankle impairment, and it would just be nice to have like an agreed domain, agreed definition on the domain foot and ankle function.
So you're gonna.
So I wonder if you looked at the literature as to what usually is foot function in studies, like what does it include?
So I think you had
So walking, footwear requirements come into it in certain tools. So sometimes I had to break down the tools because they didn't specify domain. So I would like look at what the tools are actually measuring. Foot disability, pain comes into it, but that's a separate domain, and it all just gets a bit messy. Balance, yeah, balance.
I'm just wondering, as a draft point to start, if you looked at the definition of physical function and put the words due to foot or ankle problem, disease, whatever words we want to pick, would that be a place to start and workshop from?
If you put it into ChatGPT, you'll probably get a huge.
This is just a suggestion to Lara and the group. Perhaps in future exercises, generally humans will a lot more easier to edit and correct things than to generate ideas. And so it's going to be like we're kind of mentally blocked right now because there's nothing in front of us. We might just have popped up ideas out there. And so maybe if we had like a sample definition in the future, then as we're here, we would have just quick, okay.
But I guess, yeah, that's a different definition. So, and I guess, are you asking though, does this definitely go in? Are you needing agreement that this definitely goes in? Yes. Okay, so do a yes and we'll do the thing later. Next, which definition?
The white ones are from patients. The three colors are all the same, but we were thinking that we might have to be grouped if we were really lucky. Sorry. So the white ones are purely related to what the patients reported. Blue, orange, and yellow are the same sets. We just thought we might have 3 tables, and then we could also, if people were scribbling back on them, then we would be able to say, okay, everyone in the orange group always thought this, or everyone in the blue group, but we didn't need it because there's only one group. So yeah, that's what we've done. So with function,
yeah, we do.
Yeah. Have we got specific? Oh, is function and yeah.
We called it foot and or ankle disability and impairment. So, and our proposed definition was impact on foot and or ankle health and the ability to be able to walk. But But then we started to recategorize things as function, which encompasses that of it all comes under one. Because it's more than just walking.
Are we late? It's 9:30. Are we late? Everyone's clapping. Are we late? Oh, here you go. And just to remind you, like we're done. It's 9:27.
So you might consider foot and ankle as a functional unit because any effect on the foot will have effect on the ankle and vice versa. So to make things, again, to squeeze down the number of questions, right, or that you're going to have in a tool, then using the foot and ankle as a functional unit is probably going to be much simpler because anything that happens to the foot happens to the ankle and vice versa.
And I think we can fill, I think your point is right. Like what we'll do now is we'll go away, take all this into consideration, fill in our templates, and then we can send it back out to people and they can comment.
Sarah and Teddy. We can also have a Slack channel for us to continue asynchronously. I see we didn't have enough time to kind of go through. I don't know if that's something you want to consider. And, you know, we can still have our inputs in there and perhaps follow up with a virtual meeting if that's something you want to consider.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, what we will do is obviously is once we have those, once we have the domains and we have our proposed definitions, they'll be circulated to the whole working group. If you want to join the working group, you'd be very welcome. Yeah, and thank you, Philip and Hilton, for joining us. Nice to see you both. We've got half an hour just to prepare our slides to feedback, so we'll maybe catch up with you on email later.
We wish we were there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for your patience.
Thanks, everyone.
And for contributing. That's great. Thank you.
No worries.